All right, moving on to the water and water pollution section here in ecology. First thing you're going to do is you take 5 notes in the video below. Once it starts playing, you'll take 5 notes. Doesn't have to be in complete sentences, just any 5 notes about what you see in the video. Let me stress, these are not the only notes you have to take. These are not the only notes you have to take. In order to get full credit, you have to take these 5 notes, but also continue on and take all the other notes throughout the presentation. Let me stress it again one more time. You have to take more than just these 5 notes. You have to take the actual notes about water and water pollution in order to get the grade. So the video below you're going to watch is about a guy who went swimming in one of the most polluted rivers in the world. It's called the Yangtze River in China. You'll notice that he's passing a lot of pollution, and as a matter of fact, at one point actually passes a dead body in the water. So this guy is swimming in one of the most polluted rivers in the world. Check it out. So that guy's pretty crazy going through that river, which is one of the most polluted in the world. He's just kind of a daredevil type swimmer. Wanted to, for whatever reason, swim in the most polluted river in the world. Fresh water is very important to us here as humans on Earth because it's very essential to life, meaning that water, more than anything, is the most important thing for us humans. As a matter of fact, you may or may not know this, people can survive more than a month without food. So you can go a month without eating, but you can only go a few days without water. So water is essential. Without water, there is no life. Again, you can go a long time without eating, but you can only go for a little while without food, or excuse me, without water. So water is very important to life. People are living longer today for many reasons, but one of the biggest reasons is we have more clean water sources available, especially here in the United States. So fresh water is very important. We need it to live, we need it to drink, we need it to bathe in, to wash our clothes and things like that. And we're living longer today because clean water sources are much more available than they were several years ago. Water is everywhere. Most of the planet, as you know, is made of water. In fact, 70% of the Earth's surface is water. Unfortunately, 97% of that is salt water, meaning ocean water, water that is undrinkable for humans. 3% of that is fresh water, meaning there's no salt in the water, therefore we can use it to drink. Unfortunately, 76% of the fresh water, in other words, the water that we are able to drink, is frozen, meaning it's in the North and the South Pole. So most of the water we can't drink on Earth has salt in it, and then the good stuff we can drink, most of that is frozen in the polar ice caps. So as you can see, fresh, clean water is very important to life, and it's also very hard to find on Earth. Most of the water is either salt water or it's frozen somewhere. Surface water, as you can see in this video, surface water is any water that is basically on the surface of the earth, meaning it's not underground. In other words, it's lakes, ponds, rivers, and streams. And this is a very important type of water for us because most of us, especially in large cities like here in Kansas City, most large cities depend on this surface water nearby. For example, Longview Lake, the Missouri River. Other reservoirs around Missouri are places where we go to get our water. And we use that water obviously to drink, but also to cook with or to bathe or to clean our clothes or clean other things. But surface water is very important, especially in large cities, because we use that water to live with. However, unfortunately, a lot of surface water becomes polluted. Well, what is water pollution? Well, water pollution is any time you physically, biologically, or chemically change the water quality to make it negatively affect living organisms or makes the water unsuitable for use. So in other words, you're putting something into the water that's physical. You're putting a living object into the water like algae or maybe some bacteria or a virus that's biological, or you're putting some type of chemical into the water which changes the water for the worse, and it makes it hard for us to drink or hard for us to use at all. You can also put chemicals in the water. That's called a chemical change. So if we're dumping like oil or pesticides or paint or anything into the water that would negatively affect the water, that is water pollution. So it's physical, meaning you just physically put something into the water. Most of the time that's a solid material. Biological, meaning you're putting something living in the water that affects the water. Or chemically, meaning you're breaking down the water somehow with a chemical reaction or adding chemicals to the water that make it unsuitable or unusable. Water pollution comes from two sources. One is the point source. Point source is where, just like with your finger, you can actually point at the source from where the water pollution is coming from. So it's a specific location. It's like this pipe up here. This pipe right here, I can see that pipe right there is draining out. That's a point source pollution. I can see that pollution, where it's coming from, and where it's going to. It's going down the hill, and it's probably going into a river, a stream, or a pond to pollute it. That's a point source pollution. On the other hand, a non-point source pollution is one that has no specific location. In other words, we don't know where the pollution is coming from. You can't point at it with your finger. Therefore, it's a non-point source, meaning it's unidentifiable. We don't know where it's at. An example of that would be this pond right here. The pond obviously has a lot of algae in it. However, we don't know what the cause of that algae is because there's no pipe, there's no ditch, there's no sewer that goes into this pond. It has a lot of algae on top, as you can see, this green stuff, but we don't know really where it comes from, so that's a non-point source. Again, point source, you can actually point at it. Non-point source, like rain runoff or maybe if the air is carrying pollution, we can't identify. We don't know exactly where it's coming from. We can't point at it. So point source, we can point at it, we can identify it. Non-point source, we can't identify where that pollution is coming from. There are two major forms of pollution. First one is what's called organic pollution. This is a type of pollution that's made by humans. In other words, it's organically produced, meaning we have something to do with it. That can be a pesticide, that can be a plastic that's made in a factory, that can be pharmaceuticals or different types of drugs, or it can be pigments or coloring or dyes. As you can see up here in this picture, this is another river in China. Somebody's poured some type of dye in that river, some type of pigment or some type of chemical into that river which has changed it red. Unfortunately, what happens is this type of pollution is highly toxic and it's highly poisonous. And whenever you put toxic or poison substances into fresh water, you have what's going on up here in this video, which is birth defects or genetic disorders. You can see, if you watch this long enough, you'll see some babies that have issues. They're missing parts of their body, or their bodies have been deformed, or their brains have been deformed, or they have cancer. You can see this guy here actually has hair on his face. One of the reasons they think that this guy has hair all over his body is the water where he lived was organically polluted. In other words, it had some type of chemical in the water. Major sources for this are industrial waste, meaning when companies or factories are pouring their waste into the water, household waste such as things we're dumping into the water, landfills, in other words, where your trash goes to, or just land runoff from like farms that have pesticides or different types of chemicals that they're putting on their plants are moving into the water, thus causing this organic pollution. But organic pollution is stuff that's made by humans. In other words, we produce this in a factory. And unfortunately, these are poisons and many times can lead to genetic disorders or birth defects in babies and younger children. Another type of pollution is called inorganic pollution. Inorganic pollution is produced basically by nature. This is when rocks or land is weathered and it's carried into a river or a stream, lake, or the ocean. This usually comes from mining or processing of rocks by humans. So yes, we actually do the processing of the rock, but we don't actually produce the rocks. You know that rocks are natural, and whenever we break into the earth, that nature is allowed to escape. That natural product is allowed to escape and get into the rivers. And as you can see, it turns rivers and streams different colors from the pictures below. And that's called inorganic pollution. That comes from nature. Now, sometimes humans can lead to more of this type of pollution because we kind of mess up the environment, um, but it's from nature. And this includes toxic metals, mercury, lead, nickel. They don't have taste, so we can't taste these metals. So therefore, they can actually be fatal or dangerous or maybe even cause death. So most of the time, inorganic pollution is some type of metal that comes from neighbors. The biggest types of organisms that are affected with inorganic pollution are smaller animals, so smaller fish, amphibians, and insects. These are the things that are near the lake or the pond or the stream or the river that's been affected. And the reason why they are first to be killed is they're smaller bodies. So if they have smaller bodies and they take in pollution, it affects their body a lot more than, say, a human who has a bigger body. So fish, amphibians meaning like frogs or lizards or snakes, and insects are the first to be killed because, first of all, they live near these sources, but also they have smaller bodies. But sometimes if you have a river like the one in the picture down the bottom right, you can have a situation where humans are affected too. So inorganic is different than organic. It's actually produced from nature, whereas organic, the pollution we talked about in the slide before, is produced by humans. Water quality in the United States today. Most of us think we don't have water quality issues here in the United States, but we do. The good news is this. The water quality in the United States, say 50, 60, 70 years ago, was a much, much bigger problem. But the government caught on to this, and they spent billions over the last few decades to clean up water here in the United States. It used to be large amounts of water pollution all over the United States. However, it is still a problem in the United States today. We still have problems with this. If you look at the map, you'll see that the problems are actually in the middle of the country. And the reason why they're in the middle of the United States, where you can see the red on the map, is this is where a lot of the agricultural products are produced. Whenever you have agriculture, you have fertilizers, pesticides, in other words, organic pollutants that are put into the ground and put into water systems, which lead to pollution in our rivers, streams, and other water sources. Another issue we have here in the United States, a lot of people don't know about, is only 3 out of every 4 Americans actually use city sewage systems. In other words, they're hooked to the city's waste supply. So whenever you flush the toilet, that goes away. You don't have to worry about it. Unfortunately, 1 out of every 4 Americans still use outhouses, or they just go outside when they have to go to the bathroom. So unfortunately, whenever they go to the bathroom, that waste isn't put into a sewage system. It's actually put directly into the ground. So we still have a problem here in this country of people who actually don't utilize city sewage, because there's a lot of people that live out in the country. So today, 1 out of every 4 Americans actually doesn't use the city sewage. They just basically go outside. Another issue we have is whenever it rains, the oil, the grease, the toxic chemicals, the pesticides, the fertilizers, everything that's on city streets, for example, salt in the winter, or different types of chemicals they put on the streets in the winter for ice, all of that eventually, when it rains, goes untreated into the rivers and lakes. So around here, whenever the salt and all the chemicals come off the streets when it rains, most of that stuff goes into the creeks around here, and eventually that's going to run into Longview Lake. So all the oil, grease, and chemicals that are on the streets eventually goes into Longview Lake, which pollutes the lake to a certain degree. Latest water quality reports indicate that 45% of U.S. rivers and 47% of U.S. lakes are considered polluted. So basically, half of all rivers and lakes in this country to this day are still polluted. And that reason for that is most of these chemicals that we are producing as humans, oil, grease, fertilizers, pesticides, all of those are running off whenever it rains into rivers and lakes. So every time you pour something out onto the ground, eventually that leads into a river or stream, which eventually goes into a lake, and eventually out to the ocean. So about half of our rivers and lakes here in the United States today are still polluted. The biggest issue is waterborne illness worldwide. In other words, water pollution that makes people sick worldwide. This is by far the most serious aspect of water pollution and probably the most serious problem we have on the planet worldwide. Whenever you pollute water, in some countries they have nothing but polluted water to use. Whenever that happens, you get a lot of disease. So you get diseases called typhoid, cholera, dysentery, and polio. And this isn't a problem here in the United States because we're very fortunate because we have a pretty good water supply. Unfortunately, in countries where people are poor or they live in high poverty, they don't have clean water, so many people get these diseases. And the main source is untreated sewage, meaning people are just going to the bathroom, in other words, going poo-poo and pee-pee outside. They're just going right on the ground because many of these countries don't have education that's taught them that raw sewage is bad. So they don't know, so they just go outside. Eventually that gets into the water supply and causes people to get sick. Again, this is not a problem in developed countries like the one we live in here in the United States or in Canada or in England. This is a huge, huge problem in countries that are less developed, like in Africa and Asia, where they just don't have enough money or enough education to have sewage systems that work, and people just don't know that whenever you go to the bathroom outside, it actually gets into the water supply and can make you sick again. Here's a crazy stat. On average, 3.4 million people every year die from a waterborne disease. This is the world's leading killer. It's not wars, it's not murders, it's not poverty in general. It's the leading killer is waterborne disease. In other words, disease that comes from the water that people are drinking, they're bathing in, or they're washing household items or their clothes in. 3.4 million people every year. So that's basically taking everyone in Kansas City and them dying 3 times every year. So 3.4 million people every year die just because they have bad water supplies. Here's the one that's just amazing. On average, about 4,000 children die every day from a waterborne illness. That's 1 every 20 seconds. Let me repeat that. On average, 4,000 children die every day from a waterborne illness. So children worldwide are dying because they don't have good water. So again, they're drinking water that has feces, in other words, poo-poo in it, or maybe urine, because people are going to the bathroom outside on the ground, and this is polluting the water. But 4,000 children every day are dying from waterborne illness. That's 1 about every 20 seconds. So 3 children a minute die because they don't have clean water worldwide. We don't think about it much here in the United States because it's not a big issue here. But on average worldwide, 4,000 children die every day from a waterborne illness. So it's a big problem. So that's it for water and water pollution. Make sure you take all these notes and either share them with me or show them with me so that you can get the grade. Good luck.